Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Wednesday, February the 18th, 12:33 Rio de Janeiro time. We are starting one more live stream. And as usual, if you're here with us, you have a priority to suggest topics of your interest so we can discuss live. I need to share the heads up. I cannot analyze two specific facts because otherwise this would become like a consultation, and naturally we are not allowed to provide a consultation like in a collective setting, and also without charging a fee for a consultation. In Brazil and in Portugal, this is a very subtle and kind of strict requirement that attorneys never provide a free consultation. So the idea here is that we can discuss like several topics, and sometimes I can even just provide information surrounding that specific topic, but I cannot tell you what to do, especially if it is something that is not really published everywhere, if it is more like advisory from a more knowledgeable perspective, if you will. Okay, so let's get started. If you are around, I'm gonna invite you to ping here in the chat window so I know everybody can see me, everybody can hear me. All right, I have my mic here. Hopefully it is configured okay. I have some decoration here, like with the Brazilian flag and the Portuguese flag as well. And as many of you may know, like today is Wednesday, is the last day of the long carnival holidays in Brazil. And the idea is that people would celebrate carnival during actually Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, they are kind of warming up back to work. So most firms, ours included, will start work at noon, right? So our team is actually coming back from this long holiday, and they are starting to answer clients' emails and queries and so on, which is very typical for the professional services in Brazil. And we have Aaron. Thank you for pinging. Aaron is showing a thumbs up. I guess Aaron can see us and can hear us. Thank you for pinging, Aaron. All right, and maybe we can take a look at news, see what's going on, and you guys know what's coming, what's gonna come to my screen, right? And it is what it is. That's the Banco Master, the liquidation, right? Like this bank is being liquidated by the Brazilian government. And I think it's interesting because banks going under in Brazil is extremely rare. So whenever that happens, you do see like it is basically non-stop, and during a longer period of time, news about the bank going under. Now, what is very specific to this bank is the fact that the owner of the bank, which was mostly an individual, he had links through the government. Okay, like so links to Congress people, links to senators, links to governors, to mayors, and like the main issue nowadays is going to be the links that this individual had with the Supreme Brazilian Court, right? and some, like very extremely troubling links, particularly with two of the ministers. One of the ministers, like the minister's wife, she had a contract for 130 million reais with this bank, right? And nobody could ever tell what type of service she would provide to the bank. And this is one of the two main cases. And the second one, it is another justice. And this justice, like he was participating in a resort, and the resort was receiving a lot of investment from the bank, like several $1 million. And this justice, like he was a kind of uh, he was an investor that would not show up in the management, right? So he was kind of in a more not sure if the word is hidden position, but I mean you couldn't tell from the more basic paperwork. Okay, now this justice defense is that he was kind of filing taxes for the money that he was getting from the resort. But during a long time, like media, they were chasing this minister and asking, "Listen, are you an investor? Are you an owner of this resort?" And guess what? He never said so until it was crystal clear that he was benefiting from the investments coming from this bank into the resort, right? So this is a huge case. It is becoming, more serious by the day, and naturally, right? Like the Congress is like trying to address this involvement of the justices from the Brazilian Supreme Court in this scandal, right? So that's why every single time I share with you guys the main headline, guess what? We're coming back to Bank Master. That's the name of the bank, Bank Master, right? Now, the headline here is not actually about, those potential cases of corruption, if you will. Again, there is no judgment, so we cannot say they are cases of corruption, but we can say, I guess, that they are highly suspicious, to say the least, okay? But going back to this specific headline, this headline is talking about the guarantee that bank account owners will have for a certain amount of the monies that they had in the bank, right? So this is similar to the FDIC in the United States. I don't know how much FDIC is like, guaranteeing for each account holder. I remember, a long time ago, maybe last time I took a look into that was 15 or 20 years ago, and I think it was 100,000 US dollars. Okay, so if any of you would take a look and see if the amount has increased, but I remember from memory, again, that was maybe 15 years ago, FDIC would guarantee that if a bank would go under, guess what? Like the FDIC fund, they would give you at least $100,000, right, as an insurance. Okay, so we also have that in Brazil, and that's what the this headline is talking about: 4.9 billion reais. That's how much so far is gonna cost Brazil. Okay, or the FGC. FGC again is the same concept as the FDIC in the United States. Meaning that, for, I would guess, hundreds of thousands of account holders, they are going to be receiving a certain amount of money back, right? There is a cap. So if you had more money than the cap, guess what? You're not going to receive the excess money, but the amount that is guaranteed by the FGC, yes, you would get this money back. And I don't recall as well how much it is in Brazil, but very easy for you guys to just search, search on ChatGPT. I'm sure the answer is going to come right away. So that's it. Now we also have, many actions by current President Lula, pushing for a re-election. That would be the fourth term that President Lula would achieve in Brazil. As you can tell, there is no limit for the total number of terms that you can have at the presidency. But as far as I remember, you can be president for more than twice in a row, right? So President Lula was president for 2 times. Now he's president for a third one. And guess what? He want to be president for a 4th time, right? And Yep, that's it. Let's take a look and see if we have any participations from our audience. Yes, we have Aaron. Aaron is saying in Valinhos last week, a prosecutor's family got kidnapped. Maybe I will stick to Cambuí for now. All right, yes. So Aaron is mentioning about a crime in Valinhos. Yes, Aaron. So I think like true fall Brazil, you would face some concern with safety. But I did live like in the Valinhos area, right? Like I lived from, I think it was from 2010 to 2015, and it was like the feeling of safety was very strong, right? Like I'm sure that during this period of time there would be some level of crimes, okay, but I think I could say probably compared to the average U.S. city, right? So by far, and not concerning from a safety perspective. That was back then, right? Now, as of today, I think it's still pretty solid, but I cannot say that it is the very same thing as before. But in general, even Brazilians, they are gonna pursue the Valinhos Vinhedo area pretty solid. But thank you for sharing, Aaron. Matt Gaines, how you doing, Matt? Good to see you and Adrian around. Oi, Dr. Oliveira. At some time after we move to Brazil, we will, of course, want to buy a house. We are learning that transferring a large sum of money to Brazil is very difficult. Can you discuss? Certainly. Yes, Matt. And that's a point of surprise to, like whoever is buying their first home in Brazil with money coming from abroad. Okay, so Brazil has this, history or this cultural trend of red tape and bureaucracy, and this reality is going to be across the board, right? So excessive paperwork, and an idea that the more structured the process is, the less chance for corruption. I'm not sure if it works in reality because guess what? Like, I mean, we have a very strong law addressing public administration, telling them exactly everything that they need to do to spend public money. And in my opinion, corruption in Brazil's government is just rampant, right? And it's not just at the federal level, it's pretty much at every single level, right? Like municipality, state, federal government, you name it, right? Like a lot of corruption. So this idea that by establishing a careful workflow, you're gonna weed out corruption, fraud, money laundering, it doesn't look like it works as intended. But here we are. There is a reality that makes sending money to Brazil difficult, to say the least, right? And the first thing that I noticed, like whenever we're dealing with a foreign citizen, they have this assumption that maybe they're gonna go to their Chase bank account, they're gonna make a wire transfer, and voila, the money is gonna show up in Brazil, and nothing could be further from this reality, right? Like in reality, whenever you're sending any meaningful amounts of money to Brazil, typically this money is gonna get stopped by the recipient bank, right? So let's say if you're making a wire transfer from Chase and you're sending this money to Banco do Brasil, Banco Itaú, you name it, right? Like the bank typically will stop your money and then is gonna start a compliance process to understand why you are receiving such money. And you need to provide the paperwork. So it's not just a matter of saying, well, I'm buying a house and everything is gonna be all right. That's not how it works. Once you tell the bank that you're gonna buy a house, guess what? The bank is gonna ask for all the paperwork for the underlying transaction. Because remember, there is a process in place, and the process tells the bank that unless they have strong evidence of the underlying transaction, they shouldn't rely on your word. Okay, so whenever you tell the bank, I'm gonna buy real estate, the bank is gonna say, I wanna see the purchase agreement. I wanna see the title records for the property so I can look at it and understand that there is a real property being acquired. Okay, the receiving bank, they also want to see the tax return for the seller, because then they are going to look at the tax return for the seller and they are going to make sure that this property shows up as, guess what, an asset of the seller, right? And these are just some of the documents that we would need to provide for a regular real estate acquisition in Brazil, okay? A major challenge we see out there is that whenever you are, guess what, trying to do this thing by yourself, the recipient bank, they will never handle a compliance paperwork ahead of time. Okay, so let's assume if you have a closing for the end of February and you're gonna send money, I don't know, like on day 23rd or 24th, typically there is not gonna be enough time for the recipient bank to run the compliance process, because they don't start the compliance process until you send the money, okay? And then if you send with a substantial notice, let's say if you send the money 3 weeks before closing date, then you have a very different, and in my opinion, much more concerning problem. And this problem is the risk that something is going to happen to the sellers between, you know, sending the money and closing, right? Because imagine, like in the United States, you will never just send the money to the seller and hope things are going to be all right. But that's basically what happens whenever people try to buy a house by themselves. Okay, so this is the challenge. Now, it is also possible that you could try to open a non-resident bank account. All right, so a non-resident bank account because you are not a resident as of now, and I'm not talking about you, Matt. I'm talking in general about the foreign citizen, right? Like, let's assume the foreign citizen is not a legal resident of Brazil at this time. So, you know, this person could open a non-resident bank account, and then they could send the money to this non-resident bank account as long as, you know, they are able to pass a different type of compliance. And this different type of compliance is typically known as availability, right? So availability, in colloquial terms, it means just like you have money available. But when we are talking about currency exchange, is actually a technical term. And this technical term means that you are declaring to this bank, I have this pool of money and I want to move to another country because I can, okay? And then, listen, just like I said, your word is never enough. So just because you told the bank that you have this money, that you can send abroad, it doesn't mean they are going to let you do it. The paperwork that they are going to require for the availability transfer, and again, if you're doing availability, you're not going to be sending money to the seller, because if you're sending money to the seller, it should be money to buy real estate. And if you're sending money to yourself, then typically it's going to be availability. So when you're doing the availability track, typically the bank is going to rely on two things, right? Again, there is going to be a bunch of documents, but the main ones, in my understanding, they are going to be your tax return, right? And an explanation of how you make money. Okay, so, you know, it could be like a W-2 to show your earning capability, and a tax return to reinforce the information from the W-2, and also to help explain different streams of income that you may have, and also to show that the W-2 is legit, because naturally it's going to show in the tax return as well. And then they are going to kind of compare how much money you're trying to send to Brazil to how much money you make on an annual basis. And there is no single rule. Like if you ask, all right, so what is the rule? Can I send like exactly the same amount that I make on a yearly basis, or is it double, or it would be like three times? So guess what? The Brazilian central bank, through their regulation, they don't let you have such simplified rules, if you will. They want you to take a look, and now we're talking about the bank, right? They want the banks to do a more like 360 analysis of the person sending and receiving the money. Okay, so let's assume John is sending himself like 500,000 US dollars to buy property in Brazil. So the Brazilian bank, the recipient one, right? Because Chase doesn't care as long as you go to a branch at Chase. You're gonna sign the papers. The branch manager is gonna read like a few questions they have like in a kind of script to make sure you're not to make sure, but reduce the chances that you are falling into a scam. But once you do that, you can go to Chase and wire 500,000 US dollars, right? But once the money arrives in Brazil, the Brazilian bank will want to run this kind of very detailed due diligence. And in the case of availability, they are going to look at your capability of earning, your earning capability, and your tax return. And let's assume if you're sending 500,000 US dollars, right? Something that you could show is that maybe you make 120 or 150 US dollars a year, and then you can show through documentation that you've been saving money for a purchase, okay? Or another distinction, and this one doesn't always work, but let's say if you sell a house in the United States and now you have 500,000 US dollars in your Chase bank account, when you send it to Brazil, you can tell the bank, listen, bank, I make 100,000 per year, or maybe just 50,000. But guess what? I have here all the paperwork showing that I've been saving money over a period of time, and I just sold my house, right? So this $500,000 is coming from this transaction, and therefore, even though I just make 50,000 a year, the 500 is clearly coming from a legitimate source, all right? And this is gonna work more as an art than an exact science, right? So, whenever we have a new transaction, we run by, a couple of banks, we try to achieve, the best combination possible in terms of currency exchange rate, and guess what? An approval, right? For some clients, particularly when they have a more challenging paperwork situations, the less concern is going to be the rate, right? Like their concern is basically just to be able to send the money to Brazil for a purchase of real estate, right? Very common. Not the majority. The majority of our clients, they are typically from the US. They have a very solid strings of income, and they can provide a very robust paperwork for the transaction. But every now and then we have transactions, particularly from Europe. There are some countries in addition to Europe, like Europe is not a country, right? Like in addition to European countries, there is, for instance, Singapore, right? Like Singapore, as far as I hear from people from there, like you don't pay, taxes on the personal level. So whenever we try to ask for that paperwork, we say, well, here it doesn't work like that. And in this case, guess what? We can just tell that to the bank and expect the bank to approve your compliance process, right? That's not how it works. So, and then there is this kind of interfacing between the client who doesn't have a tax return and the bank who says, well, I need a tax return, right? And then whenever we have a situation like this, what we try to do is to provide a very robust financial review from the firm explaining where this client is getting his money from. Sometimes we get a letter from a CPA in the country of residency, And the CPA would say, listen, he doesn't file taxes, but he doesn't need to. And I am, attesting that, those bank statements, they are legitimate. And then we explain, like we create a narrative that is both truthful, like in a sense that we are explaining the client side, and it's also uh, 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 meeting the Brazilian bank's requirements. All right. Okay. So Matt, yeah, sorry if I went too long on the explanation, but yes, currency exchange, sending money to Brazil is typically much more complex than foreign citizens would expect. And Matt is graciously sharing FDIC as of today is 250,000 US dollars per account. That's a lot of money for sure, much more than what you would have as a guarantee in Brazil. If I had to guess, right, I may be wrong, but I would guess for Brazil maybe 300,000 reais, which could be around, like 60,000 US dollars total, right? If I'm not mistaken, that's typically per tax ID. So even if you have multiple accounts with a failing bank, you're gonna get a maximum of, let's say, if 300,000 is the amount, that's how much you would get in total and not per account. Again, I'm talking from memory. It has been, like literally decades. Last time I took a look into this subject. General Principal, good to see you. Mr. Oliveira, I heard you mention a lot of properties in Florianopolis do not have titles. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Does this problem also exist on the mainland side in São José? General Principal, yes. Florianopolis is probably the number one source of high-end properties without title. Okay, and it is like a historical reason, a long time ago, I would assume it was just because it is an island, right? And islands, they have, particularly Florianopolis, plenty of bodies of water. And I would assume that was the, number one cause. But, as my understanding of Florianopolis evolved, I also learned that in Florianopolis, basically all the land in that island was owned by very few families, right? Like, I don't know, 3 or 4 families would own everything in Florianopolis. And you know what? Like, look at that, right? Like, this is like a recurring reality. So those families, to avoid, guess what? Taxation, they would sell tracts of land on a possession only basis, because if you just basically getting a private contract between you, the seller, and the buyer, guess what, the government doesn't see that and cannot charge you for that, right? And in addition to that, as the heads of those families would pass away, children, again, to avoid declaring those lands to the taxation authority because of the probate taxes, they would, guess what, replicate what they learned from their parents. They would basically do the same thing. Let's hide the transaction so I don't need to pay the government. So I think, in my understanding, is that there is this kind of cultural trait in Florianopolis, and maybe this can have effects elsewhere, including São José, that people basically say, you know what, there is a risk that if I buy a property, without a title, I'm not gonna be able, guess what, to have a finance. So I'm not gonna have, buyers using finance. If I have a foreign citizen trying to send the money from abroad, guess what? The bank doesn't want to touch that because you cannot show that there is a real property, right? Like we did succeed in getting some of those properties funded from abroad, but a lot of headache. And guess what? The clients had to pay a lot of money because we need to fight really hard for the bank to agree with handling the currency exchange, despite the lack of title records, right? But that's more or less the explanation. It does exist in other areas, also kind of somewhat common in the northeast and the north of Brazil, right? Like my wife, she's from the Amazon, and her family, like her father, like they had or they have, I don't know, a lot of land, and there is basically no title records for that land because guess what? There are limited registries, limited cartórios in those areas, and paperwork is very how can I say, very sparse. And again, people are not gonna want to declare things or get title records because then they are paying the government, right? Same reasoning as in Florianopolis. Now, this said, if you go to other markets like São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, it is actually, in my experience, right? Like, and there may be exceptions. It's very rare for you to find properties without a proper title, all right? But yeah, general principle. So Florianopolis, at least in our practice, number one city with possession-only transactions. And I would say you're probably gonna see this happening in São José as well, just because São José is pretty much like a continuation of Florianopolis on the continental side. And guess what? Like those cultural traits, they are gonna permeate the state. All right, general principle. Interesting question. All right, right-minded, good information. Thank you. Thank you for participating, right-minded. Let us know the topics of your interest, and you're gonna be happy to discuss over here. And in the meantime, let me talk a little bit about the digital nomad, right? Like Brazil digital nomad visa or residency, how it's working nowadays, because this is like, a type of consultation we have every single week, right? And we have with different attorneys of the firm, we have with our salesperson as well, and it never goes away. But I guess people don't necessarily attend our live stream, but sharing for those of you who are here now, right? The first thing is the digital nomad operates as a bridge, right? So the digital nomad, it is for those of you who wanna try, who wanna test the waters in Brazil. Paperwork is very easy to accomplish, which is not the case for other tracks, right? So for instance, if you're gonna apply to the retirement, paperwork is much more complex. If you're gonna apply for residency through marriage, guess what? Much more robust documentation, right? So the digital nomad, it gets you a full year in Brazil with, a very low entry level, right? Type of documentation. Now, this is the upside. The upside, it is easy, fast, and you get what you want, like I would say 98% of the time. Now, the main downside is that it never gets you anywhere. And what do I mean by that? I mean that maybe, as of today, we have clients who are, let me see, 23, 24, 25. Yeah, they are going to start their fourth year in Brazil under the digital nomad, right? So 4 years of residency in Brazil. And if they don't renew, they get nothing. Or if they renew continuously, like even if in theory they could renew for 10 years in a row, they get nothing, right? You don't get anything. You don't get permanent residency. You don't get citizenship. You get nothing, right? So this is the downside of the digital nomad. Easy to obtain, and at the end of this journey, you don't get anything at all, right? Now, my take on that for many people, when they look at it and say, well, but, why should I still pursue? I say, listen, when you are in Brazil, chances are, first, you're going to check if you like the country or not, which I think it's a huge plus. And second, once you are in Brazil, many things could happen to you, right? Like, and two very basic examples that we see happening often. often one it's gonna be if you're hired, right? Like there is a bunch of foreign companies in Brazil, and sometimes by just chance, you end up getting in touch with a prospective employer in Brazil, and if this employer does go through the trouble of hiring you as an employee, not as a consultant, not as a company, you gotta be as a fully fledged employee, which we call in Portuguese CLT, right? CLT is like the legislation applicable to the, literally hundreds of obligations an employer is going to have with you. So, not surprisingly, difficult to find someone willing to bite the bullet. But once you find it, guess what? Even a work visa could lead to permanent residency, right? And guess what? Maybe you entered Brazil under the digital nomad. You became part of the expat community in Brazil, and then once you find an employer, thumbs up. Now you have a track to permanent residency, and down the line, not immediately, down the line, even citizenship. All right, so that's one possibility. Second possibility, let's say if you're single and you end up developing a relationship, and this relationship has as an outcome either marriage or a child born in Brazil, that's another pathway for permanent residency and down the line citizenship. Okay, or if none of those would apply to you, typically the other common pathways are going to be investment in real estate. Okay, investment in a company, which we don't like here at the firm. And the third one would be like the retirement track. The retirement track is much more cumbersome in terms of paperwork. But guess what? There is a reason for that. The reason is because nowadays, the retirement track, it does give you a shot at a permanent residency in just a few years, right? So believe it or not, the retirement track is actually superior to investment in real estate, okay? So there you go. That's the digital nomad as of today. All right, we have something from Matt Gaines. Thank you for the explanation, Dr. Oliveira. You're pretty welcome, Matt and Adrian. We are glad to know that your firm can assist with the transfer process. We'll definitely want to purchase a home. Yeah, for sure, Matt. That's a big accomplishment, right? It does not matter where. So yes, once you buy a property in Brazil, that's typically in the Brazilian society a major accomplishment, okay? I know it's not easy to buy a home in the US as well, right? And in Brazil, I guess it is at least as difficult for a person to buy a property. Now, very interesting to mention this reality of acquisition of real estate acquisition. It also varies depending on the state and the city. Something that's very unique to Rio de Janeiro, in my opinion, in my experience with real estate transactions, is like you have a lot of old money, right? So you have money that runs into the family, and typically, right, like once the head of a family passes away, those assets, they're going to be distributed among the children, and that's going to be the bulk of their assets. Okay, so very difficult, particularly in Rio de Janeiro, and of course you have lots of exceptions, right? Like you have people working in the oil sector. You have people working in highly well-paid positions in Rio de Janeiro. You have a bunch of those exceptions. But at the same time, something that I see in Rio de Janeiro that I don't see as often in other states is that many people, they will never buy real estate in their whole lives, right? The way that they are going to acquire real estate is through inheritance. Okay, and it's very interesting, right? Particularly in some neighborhoods like Leblon is probably the number one neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro. And we have a real estate friend of ours, and she says it's like, a neighborhood in which most property owners, they are heirs, right? Because if you're buying a property with your own cash, usually you're gonna buy in a different neighborhood just because Leblon is so expensive, right? And if you compare, Leblon to Ipanema, which is a very high-end neighborhood, guess what? Leblon is much more expensive than Ipanema, and then several times more expensive than Copacabana. Okay, so you also have this reality in Brazil. In São Paulo is of course like the business engine of Brazil, so it is much more common for people in São Paulo to buy real estate through their own efforts. Rio de Janeiro, that's also gonna happen a lot, but not in every neighborhood, right? That's gonna be typically in cheaper neighborhoods. In very expensive neighborhoods in Rio de Janeiro, people don't usually choose to buy, unless, guess what? They have a really high salary or string of income, but typically they are gonna get those properties through inheritance. All right. Aaron, do foreign companies offer wages that digital nomads would consider? I heard Microsoft is in or going to be in Hortolândia. I would imagine they pay Brazil typical wages. Right. So, Aaron, in this case, let's assume, just for the sake of explaining to everyone here with us, if you are working as a digital nomad, you're not supposed to receive employment from a company. And in this case, you're gonna need to first apply for a work visa based on the job offer, right? And the entity hiring you, in this case, Microsoft, they will need to provide all the paperwork for the hiring and participate as a sponsor for your work visa. But assuming they are willing to do so, you could very easily migrate from the digital nomad to the work visa. And the work visa, as long as you're not fired, right? And I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about people in general. As long as the employee doesn't get fired, guess what? In basically 2 years, you can, apply for, permanent residency, which, by the way, in Brazil, we don't call permanent residency. I just say permanent residency because it's easier to explain, but our terminology is actually por prazo indeterminado, or for an indefinite period of time. And with the work visa, it's just like that. First, you get a stay for 2 years, and if your employer is willing to apply with you as a sponsor, they are going to renew your resident card under the indefinite period of time, or basically the permanent residency. All right, but that's a journey that's potentially the case. Now, in terms of salary, Aaron, I can tell you, like Microsoft can pay much better than the Brazilian employers, right? So we're going to start with this consideration. People working for Microsoft, they naturally are paid much better than someone working for company, I don't know, João da Silva, right? And that's going to be the first consideration. The second one is Microsoft is going to adjust salaries based on the national reality, right? So if in the United States, I don't know, someone working as a programmer for Microsoft would receive, just wide guessing, I don't know, $5,000 a month or 7,500. It doesn't mean that in Brazil they are going to receive the same amount. I would say they will probably receive much less, at least from a dollar currency perspective, but they would still be paid much better than the average Brazilian worker. Okay, so substantially more than the average Brazilian worker, and potentially substantially less than a U.S. employee working in the United States. Okay. Now, another nuance is that if you are an expat coming from the States under a US employer, typically they are gonna, guess what? They are gonna still pay you as a US employee, even though you're gonna be spending like a Brazilian. So that's why expats, when they come to Brazil with a sponsor from the get-go, receiving US salaries, I mean, they're gonna live in Brazil like kings because, sometimes you have people receiving like $10,000 a month, and $10,000 a month, like you can live very comfortably in Brazil, right? Pretty much in any city. Like it could be Rio de Janeiro, it could be São Paulo. You're gonna have a very comfortable living in Brazil. All right. So that's it for those questions. Let's talk. We mentioned some of the pathways to permanent residency. Just highlighting, right? Like two main ones, like real investment in real estate. Another one is gonna be like investment in a company. For those of you who are, recurring participants, you know why we don't like the participate, the investment in a company is just because the failure rate is just too high, and I don't think it makes sense for you to risk your immigration status based on a business, right? Like unless you are the adventurer type of person, I don't think you should mix up, like business and immigration. It doesn't make much sense in my head. That's the first problem I have with the investment in a company route. The second one is like our horrible labor framework, right? Which is, by the way, I don't know, 150 years old, or maybe not so much, maybe more like, I think it is from the 40s, from 1930s or 1940s, so 90 years old approximately. The CLT, believe it or not, is like almost 100 years old. And it is, highly protective of employees, which I don't think it is a problem. Of course, I like the idea of protecting employees, but the level of burden to companies, I don't think it is compatible with nowadays. So in the United States, you have as a typical rule the fire at will, meaning that I can be working for a company for 20 years. If that company realizes I am no longer necessary, guess what? They say, listen, I'm firing you, and I'm firing you because I'm firing you, right? There is no need for an explanation. Not in Brazil. In Brazil, if you're gonna fire someone without cause, you're gonna pay a huge fine. You're gonna pay 40% of the social security accumulated by that employee over the course of their employment. So this is just one of the things. And then you're gonna need to give many benefits, and on top of everything, very traditional in Brazil for an employee who's fired to come back and make up, believe it or not, make up claims against the employer to basically get some more money out of the employer. Very sad cultural trait in Brazil. Employees who are going to take advantage through, unfortunately, as well, the support of, guess who? Labor attorneys, right? Who are going to collude to go and pursue like unlegitimately claims against employers, right? Now, of course, there is a bunch of bad employers as well who are not actually, making everything that they should be doing according to the law. And those, like, they do deserve to be, like sued. But what I see in reality, right, and we do work with a large number of companies in Brazil on different, types of capacity. And we do see very often, or what I see more often than not, unfortunately, is like, disgruntled employees pursuing bad faith claims against employers, right? So when I look at all of that, and then I see someone coming from the US saying, well, I want to start a business in Brazil, and I'm gonna, get the immigration pathway out of this investment, it sounds like a horrible idea to me. Okay? But that's my opinion. There is a bunch of law firms out there who would not think twice before, guess what, helping you with the business investment route. And it is what it is. I will leave it up to you to decide what to make out of this discussion. All right. And yes, Aaron, like kings or digital nomads. Exactly. Like kings or digital nomads. Yeah, plenty of possibilities. Maho, hello, Mr. Oliveira. Welcome back, Maho. Let's assume someone applied for the digital nomad visa and got denied. Can they reapply again, and how likely are they gonna get it? You can reapply, Maho. The first challenge to reapplying is gonna be the fees, right? So there are meaningful fees designed to preclude people from, keeping trying too much. That's the first thing. And unfortunately, once you are denied a visa, guess what? The officer who handled your application, they're going to write something in the Brazilian system. And by the way, this is not going to be accessible to you most of the time, right? And then once you have this denial, there's going to be some detrimental information added to your file. Now, in Brazilian immigration, it's pretty settled that nobody should be penalized forever. Okay, so if you have a denial, yes, it's not going to look good on your file, but from a constitutional point of view, that should not operate as a bar to applying again. So, in other words, Mahu, chances are going to be low of success, but guess what? You can apply as many times as you feel like, as long as you pay the fees and as long as you keep the hope, I would say. All right, Maho. So, something I typically share over here, there is an unwritten policy of the Brazilian government of denying applicants from countries in which people are going to typically immigrate to Brazil. Okay, so it could be Pakistan, it could be India, it could be Egypt, it could be Nigeria, right? So there is like a large number of countries that if your nationality is from that country, whenever the immigration officer looks at your passport, they have this kind of idea, unless I can tell this is a really high net worth individual, or someone who has a lot of strong reasons to come back to their country of residency, I'm not gonna get them visitor visa, I'm not gonna get them digital nomad visa, I'm not gonna get them pretty much anything at all, right? And this is unwritten, like there is nothing written in the Brazilian, like consulate and embassies documents, right? But they have different ways of conveying this idea to their personnel. And the idea right here is that they say, listen, if you have any feeling this person is not going to return to this country, don't give them a visa. All right. So that's pretty much the way that they convey. And then among immigration officers, I think that's where the understanding that a certain country should not receive a visa is going to grow. But again, informally, right? And they can say, well, we are here and this place is really, really tough. I guess anyone who could, reach Brazil, they would never come back to this place, right? This is the type of conversation I imagine like immigration officers in some of the Brazilian embassies and consulates out there having between them. I never heard, right? Like, I'm just trying to do here a role playing to help you understand the underlying dynamics. All right, Mahu. Basically, the best way is hire an attorney, right? Yeah. So this is, I would say, a very common assumption. Now, there is another challenge here, Maho, which is Brazilian consulates and embassies typically they don't allow attorney representation, meaning like they don't want people to be paying attorneys and attorneys chasing the consulate. So they do not really allow you to apply through an attorney, right? Now, something we do every now and then is like when we think that there was a decision by a consulate or an embassy that was arbitrary and against the evidence, like we can actually file a lawsuit in Brazil. Okay, so it's not going to be abroad, it's going to be in Brazil against the Brazilian public administration, or better saying, the federal government, to compel the government to either review their decision or at least explain their reasoning so we can fight the underlying reasons why they denied your visa in the first place, right? Now, it's rare. We don't do that. Like if you're trying digital nomad, typically we don't like to file those lawsuits because, typically when we do file is like for more serious cases. Let's say if you have a head of a family in Brazil and they do have like legal status and then they are trying to bring their family and then the consulate or embassy abroad, they don't grant the family unification visa, then in this case we feel more comfortable about, we feel more comfortable to actually, go after the federal government to say, listen, you either gonna present really strong reasons for not allowing the spouse and the children to enter Brazil, or you're gonna review your decision, right? Now, on the digital nomad side, I think it's much more discretionary to the Brazilian government to say yes or no, right? So, in conclusion, depending on the circumstances, we can fight a consulate or embassy's decision in Brazil, not abroad, and but that's gonna be on a narrow set of cases, if you will. All right, we have Coleman. Hello, Lucian. We spoke last week, and I wanted to let you know that my wife is registering our marriage tomorrow, and I will let you know how family reunion visa process go. All right, Coleman. Thank you for showing up. Good to see you over here, and glad you know things are proceeding, things are progressing, Coleman. Thank you for showing up. Let us know if you have other topics of your interest to be discussed. And we are actually at the end of our today's live stream, and we're gonna have a somewhat break, okay, like next week, but we're gonna be back. We're gonna be back on the 4th. So we're not gonna have a live stream on the 25th, but we will have a live stream on the 4th, right? So next Wednesday's live stream is gonna be on the 4th. All right, I'm gonna finish up with a question here from Coleman because he just arrived. I don't wanna, close the door on his face. So last question for today's live stream. What is your thought on buying land in Paraty? Coleman, like Paraty is pretty solid with foreign citizens, okay? Not surprisingly, like village by the coast. So there is a lot of, tourism in there. There is a lot of, not only tourists, but also people living on a more permanent basis. And what I like the most for someone interested in buying a property in Paraty is like the existence of a pool of purchases from abroad. So you're not only selling your property to Brazilians, but typically there are also many foreign citizens around, to pay like a higher amount for a property in Paraty. So there you go, Paraty, coastal area, kind of between Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. Now, this is not for everyone, Coleman, right? Internet is not gonna be top notch, okay? Like if you needed to go to a really quality hospital, you may need to drive for hours. but is like the very special, you know, lifestyle, if you will, right? Like of living in a fisherman village, right? It's not a fisherman village, but the feeling is kind of, and there is a marina in Paraty, right? I've been there, you know, many times, which you are actually gonna see many fishing boats, right? So you're gonna see fishing boats, and you're also gonna see boats for, you know, just like a leisure, if you will. But again, it ranks really high on lifestyle, quality of living, even affordability, if you will. I think, other than the cost of premium real estate. But if we're talking about employment, if we're talking about quality of internet, if we're talking about easy access to health services, then not ideal. All right, so you're gonna need to check on what your priorities are and take from there. All right, so once again, I want to say, you know, thank you for everyone who participated today. I want to, invite you to show up on our next live stream, which is not going to be next Wednesday. It's going to be on the Wednesday following. And we have, by the way, we have created the event on YouTube. So if you want to just right now come to the live section, and then you can click on notify me. And this way, especially for Coleman, that I see Coleman may have other questions here. You guys can click on notify me, and then once we start the live stream, you're gonna receive a notification. And I wanna wish you all a blessed rest of your Wednesday, and I'm gonna see you in our next live stream.